Thank you for helping, friends. On Friday and Saturday this past weekend, our conference was supposed to install our new conference minister, Rachel Pryor. Now, we, of course, canceled the installation, but we had reserved a block of rooms in St. Gabriel, and we also had a meal on Friday evening that had already been prepared and paid for. And so we pivoted, and we offered the rooms to evacuees, to people who needed to get out of the smoke, to pastors in the area, and the rest were released to firefighters, many of whom had been battling the fires for 48 hours. There was a small group of us from the conference who still came for dinner to offer support to those impacted. Paul and Carl were there. They lost the building of their church. And so we were just there in community together. And the extra meals also went to firefighters and evacuees, two of whom were sitting at the table behind us. And you can't make this up. Their names were Jose and Maria. They lost their home in the Altadena fire, and they had just finished building a house on their property for their daughter and son-in-law, Emmanuel. And they were expecting a baby. The family was supposed to move into the home this week. Another conference minister who was there for the installation was able to extend their stay at the hotel and provide funds from their home conference in the Midwest. Maria and Jose told us that their kids told them that they would now take care of them. It was their turn, and they would rebuild a home for all of them this time. In the passage from Luke today, Jesus makes this bold decision to have John baptize him. Even the divine chooses interconnectedness and asks for help. What would the story be like if Jesus had baptized himself? Or if the message of God came without another human being? I can't tell you how many stories I've heard like this week. Raise your hand if you have just heard how people have stepped up and helped and loved each other and cared for one another, that interconnection. Nico, our guest, and I were emailing this week, and we were discerning whether or not we were going to reschedule, but we decided to stay with this day. Now, we will not rush through our grief or minimize the destruction around us and the reality of what is going on. And I know you know this, when sorrow is so big, a small mercy is joy in watching people care for each other, love each other, support each other, see each other, and find ways to bring new life. Jesus needed John in that sacred moment like we need each other, and we need to tell the stories of joy and tell the stories of God's beloveds with whom God is well pleased. God's beloved trans teenagers that our guests will speak about today. Nico Lang interviewed over the course of a year and lived with families and then wrote this beautiful book called American Teenager. And you can see Nico's biography in the back. Pick up copies of this book at Romans this week in Pasadena. That did not happen, but I am going to bring copies of their book next week. So if you would like a copy, I'm going to have Nico sign them as well. Please let me know. So Nico is going to speak for a bit, and then we'll have maybe one or two questions, and then Nico has graciously offered to stay after the service. So without further ado, Nico, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I don't know why I brought the program. Like, I'm going to need it up here. But hello. It's really good to be here. Kind of unexpected. I thought earlier in the week we would probably cancel this just because I think everyone's grief just feels really overwhelming right now. I don't know about all of you, but I just feel like I've been in shock the last couple days. Like one of my old like college friends just I found out recently he just lost everything, like his home, all of it. And they've been really lucky, like fundraising on GoFundMe, people have been really generous. But it's just really hard to see like how much people are suffering through right now. Like my husband and I, we had to evacuate on Wednesday because the fire was like a couple blocks from our apartment, and we were like really fortunate. But I think I've just been like personally just dealing with like survivor's guilt. So it's been a lot. And if you are also sort of feeling a lot right now, I just wanted to kind of make space for that before I talk, just because I think it's important to recognize what we all bring to this space. And sometimes what we bring is grief. So, but on that note, thank you everybody. My name is Nico Lang. I am a longtime LGBTQ+ journalist and an author. I spent a year traveling the country to write this book. Can I steal it as a prop? I'm like Carrot Top, I love a prop, you know? This right here, yours for the low price of, so I spent a year staying with families across the country to write this book. The families were in, let's see if I can do this in order, South Dakota, Alabama, West Virginia, Texas, Illinois, Florida, and California. I can never remember the chronology exactly. And my goal was really to show families of trans kids as they are. There's so much dehumanizing rhetoric and just misinformation about their lives. And I felt like the best way to combat that was sort of giving a platform to them to tell us about who they are. Like, what are their lives like? What are their interests? What are their joys, their hopes, their fears, their desires? For these kids, it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, what do you see for yourself in this world? I feel like cisgender kids, which are kids who aren't trans, get to talk about those sorts of things and think about those things a lot, right? You sort of get like offered the fullness of identity and humanity. But for trans kids, I still feel like they're fighting for that. They're like fighting for the ability to get to be human in the way that everybody else is. And this book was really that. Like, it's giving these kids the chance to just be seen as a person. Some of my favorite conversations in the book are the ones that had nothing to do with anything. They're just totally random. Like one of the kids was here in California, in Torrance actually, and she goes to the Buffy the Vampire Slayer high school, but she had never seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I was like, girl, what have you been doing? So as much as I was not supposed to like inject my agenda like onto the kids, I was like, we are watching the Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So a big chunk of the chapter is us watching Buffy and her sort of reacting to it, being like, oh my God, there's my bench. Like, that's the water fountain. And then the chapter before that was in Florida, and it's quite a heavy chapter. It's about two trans teens who were siblings, Jack and Augie. And they live in Florida, which is not a great place to be trans right now. It's very difficult because of certain politicians who have done a couple things. I don't know, you can Google it. But so Jack is a 19-year-old trans girl, and Augie is their younger sibling who is 16 and non-binary. And Jack had been detransitioned by the state because she was one of the kids who lost their gender-affirming care through Medicaid. And you know, so that happened when she was 17, and it took her 5 months to turn 18, so that way she could get her health care back. And during that time, she sort of had to watch her body slip away from her, this body that she'd fought so hard for. And it was a tremendously terrible time in all of their lives. Like Jack, she stopped going outside, she stopped leaving her room. She would just sit in the dark all day because she was so scared about catching a glimpse of herself in the mirror. And she got so skinny because she stopped eating that her mom thought her heart would stop in her sleep. So she would sit beside her every night as she fell asleep in case she needed to call the emergency room. But even still through all that, like the family, they have this way of like surviving and thriving through things that I just find really relatable. They just have this sick sense of humor. Like they're just like very like dark in a funny way people that it's kind of, as I write in the book, if life is a sick joke, they might as well be in on it. So we would just like watch movies and joke around with each other. And one day Jack and I stood on the balcony and we talked about Kierkegaard which if you were never forced to read Kierkegaard in undergrad, you're very lucky. He's a famously dense, Danish theologian, and she had recently been reading Fear and Trembling, which is sort of his big text about moral philosophy. And we just spent 2 hours on the balcony talking about Kierkegaard and debating it. And when it was happening, I was like, this needs to go in the book. This is what the book is. Because it was a way that these kids, I felt like, had never gotten to be seen or portrayed before. That they're often sort of denied those little moments of humanity that I think the rest of us get. And this book is really filled with that, with so many of those things that I feel like these kids have never gotten, the ways that they've never gotten the chance to be seen. And one of the ways that I thought was really important to sort of tie it to the religiousness of all this is that so many of these kids come from faith backgrounds. So we've got, to sort of go in order, in South Dakota, our family there was Baptist. They were kicked out of their church when their son came out as trans. They were sort of given a choice that he could either be himself and leave the church or pretend to be a girl and come. So they were like, well, obviously we're going to do what's best for our kid, so we've got to leave. And then in Texas, that was a more positive story. So Ruby there is a 19-year-old trans girl who goes to a very devout Episcopal church. And I liked that story a lot because when they were pitching being in the book, they compared their lives to Schitt's Creek, which is, who has seen Schitt's Creek? Hands? Who has not seen Schitt's Creek? What are you doing? Do you not have Netflix? Do you need some money for a Netflix account? Hit me up. Anyhow, it is a very lovely television show about a fictional town in Canada called Schitt's Creek, where homophobia doesn't exist. So this sort of local town, what is it, apothecary? It's like an apothecary? I don't know what that is, but it's something. Where he's got his little boyfriend and they have this beautiful relationship and no one's a jerk to them because they don't know what homophobia is. Canada, it's a different place, you know? And it's just such a lovely vision of the world and what it can be. And her mom, Ruby's mom, had argued that their lives were kind of similar, that she'd grown up in the church, she'd come out in the church, and she'd been loved and accepted for who she was pretty much from minute one. Her parents had figured out that there was something going on when she was a kid. They either figured that she would be gay or trans or something, and if it ended up being a thing, they would figure it out when it came, and also do the work to make sure that they were ready. So they did their homework. They read every book. They knew all the terminology. When she finally said, "Mom, Dad, I'm trans," they were like, "Great, we've been preparing for this for years. We got you." Not all kids get that. That's tremendously lucky. And she's been tremendously lucky in so many ways. When she came out, her church threw a coming out party for her. It's technically called a renaming liturgy, which what happens is you stand up in front of the church, you give a big speech, you read some scripture, and they give you a new confirmation certificate. They throw out the old one that has your old name on it, and they give you a new one that sort of reflects the fullness not only of yourself, but who they believe God intended you to be. It's a beautiful ceremony that just so many trans kids don't get, right? A lot of kids just don't get that kind of moment. They don't get that kind of affirmation. And with this book, I just needed to tell people that that was possible, that those stories of rejection are there. So, the story about the Baptist family who had to leave, that's real, that's valid. I know so many people who have had those kinds of experiences. I feel like it's the kind of story that we come to expect because it's the only story that we hear. But it's not the only story that's out there. There are stories of communities that love and uplift and affirm trans kids. We just don't hear enough about them. So with this book, I just wanted to tell stories I've never heard before that I felt like I wanted to hear and I needed to hear because I felt like other people needed to hear them too. In Ruby's case, that girl, she's got it all. So this is totally an accident, but when I flew down to Houston, which is where they live, 3 days after I got there, she got asked out by the boy that she likes. So I got to sort of document her first love. And they let me do it. They agreed to just let me write about it in the book. We had a conversation and everyone's like, cool, we're in. And that was just so rare and unique and wonderful because trans kids never get to see that. They never get to see that they're loved and are deserving of love and can find love in this world. So often they're told that that doesn't exist for them. Often, like when trans kids come out, their parents have these sort of worries, and one of them is that, will they find a partner? Will they find someone who like sees all of them and loves all of them? And I know where that comes from, right? That fear, because you just want the best for your kids. But being able to be reminded that it doesn't have to be like that, that the default setting doesn't have to be like misery and loneliness, that's just so important because we just don't see enough of that. And I've been so glad to be able to talk about this book with churches and congregations across the country, because I feel like this is the place where these conversations are needed most, because so many churches, I think, are already like really doing the work. Like they'll have like trans 101s, and I always have to use the bathroom, so I went to the bathroom like as soon as I got here, and there was like this like poster on the wall in there, or really it was just like a piece of paper, like a flyer. It was like how to talk to trans people, how not to talk to trans people, and I thought that that was so nice, and that was like, oh, that's so welcoming. But I feel like often you don't get to take the conversation further than that, you know? And people are often looking for ways to have these conversations, to talk about this, because it impacts so many people's lives. It touches so many people's worlds and communities. So being able to sort of deepen those conversations and also remind people that, like, you can be loved. Love is out there. Like, it's important right now. I think we all need to hear that, especially this week. Like, I've been devastated. It feels like the world is just a devastating, awful place sometimes. So, like, to see the light that's out there, that's important. It gives all of us hope. And I have also loved doing this because, okay, I'm gonna read you guys something. And maybe this is kind of shady, but I don't really care. I've been emailing a lot of churches. I have this like really wild spreadsheet, you would probably pass out if you saw it, of like every affirming church in every state across the country, and I'm going to email all of them because I have the overfocus kind of ADHD, and I love a project. So I emailed this church in Philadelphia. I probably shouldn't say that, but I just did. Oops. And I, talked about the book and its importance, and just invited them to sort of partake in it. And the father emailed me back like right away, but didn't mean to. He basically was just like, I don't know who this person is, but we should not partner with this in any way. So basically, if this person reaches out to you, I don't know, like just arrest them or something. So I emailed them back right away because I also am very confrontational. And I said, "Hi, Father. I assume you didn't mean to CC me. Oops. But since you did, I'll respond. I've been engaging faith groups across the country about this work for several reasons. I'm a person of faith. I grew up in church, and 4 of the families in this book are families of faith: Baptist, Evangelical, Episcopal, and Muslim. The Muslim family also includes a parent who is Jewish but converted to Christianity later in life. LGBTQ+ issues cross all walks of life and faith traditions, as I'm sure many of your congregants know." I loved saying that, just like rubbing the nose in it, In fact, many families of trans youth seek out affirming congregations after their kids come out to look for resources and find community. Many areas don't have LGBTQ+ community centers or even pride events, so your local welcoming church becomes the next best thing. That's another reason that I've wanted to engage churches in the conversation. I want to meet folks where they actually are, and thus far, so many congregations have been incredibly supportive and kind. You may notice that one of the events in Southern New Jersey next week is a local UU church. In January alone, I have 3 church events lined up, including this one. And then I said, I don't need anything from y'all, or even a response, and I believe the reply I saw made clear your stance on this. But the way I found your congregation is through gaychurch.org, the same way that I've been having great conversations with amazing people of faith across the country. I'm super excited to continue those discussions. A lot of people need them right now. And then I said, to really rub their nose, have a blessed week, everyone. And thanks for creating space for people. It's important work. I love saying that at the end because I'm a Buddhist. So like getting to be more Christian than the Christian felt awesome. But yeah, it was great. But the reason I say that is that I think so many people think about themselves as being allies, because that church, it's literally listed on Gay Church. And I asked around like friends, like the reputation of the church, what's their programming like, and they had like good cred in the community. Like, this is supposed to be a church that, like, people can go to. They're known as being queer affirming. And you sort of, like, look at the reality of that. So I think it's a reminder for all of us that, like, if you think about yourself as an ally, or you think about yourself doing the work, like, we all need to sort of step up for the people around us. We need to step up for these kids because, you know, you sort of look at what happens otherwise. I think that there are a lot of people who maybe voted in a certain thing that we all did in November who saw themselves as allies, who saw themselves as, like, loving and supporting the queer and trans people in their lives, and still did what they did anyway. So when I think about 2025 and I think about the future of our country, I just think that we all need to stand up for each other better, that we need to show up for each other better. Like, these kids have been fighting for themselves and their rights for such a long time. You know, people often ask me about, like, how I think we get out of this and how I think we break the cycle. And I think it's when we stop making those kids do it alone. That, you know, it's like when you're a trans kid, you come out and you might be really lucky and you don't have to do the education work like Ruby, right? Our girl in Texas. People have done that education work for you, you're great. But that's often not the case. You have to educate your parents, you have to educate your church maybe, you have to educate your teachers about what pronouns to use, the right name to call you, and then you have to educate your lawmakers. It's a lot to take on all by yourself, and it's exhausting, especially when you're trying to just be a kid. Because it's like, you're 15, no 15-year-old wants to go beg your lawmakers to be treated like a human being. Like, no adult wants to do that, especially a 15-year-old. And the kids will often tell me, you know, the ones that are interviewed in the book, that they don't really want to be doing this. That, like, you know, given the opportunity, they would love to just focus on being kids. And I always found that really ironic because that's what GOP lawmakers always say that they're fighting for, that they just want these kids to be kids, right? But really, these kids, what they're doing is they're taking away their childhoods. So, because they have to spend so much of their childhoods fighting to be themselves. So I think the best gift that we can give them is standing up for them so that way they can finally be themselves, that they don't have to do this all the time. So I think, you know, so many of the churches that I've talked to are the people who are already doing the work, so you're sort of preaching to the already converted. But I think being here this morning and seeing the love in this space and how much you're all just showing up for each other right now, like, all of you didn't have to be here this morning. Like, you know, it's a hard time. You could have just done your own thing. You could have gone to Palm Springs for the weekend to just get out of all this. But you showed up for each other, like, you're here. And I would just say, keep going. Keep doing that. Keep showing up. Like, it really matters. People need it right now. Like, we need it in our own city, and these kids need it too. So just keep at it. Like, it's really important. And thank all of you for listening to my rambling conversation. I barely slept in like 2 days. So when Ashley invited me, I was just like, you know what? We're going to see what I say in that microphone. But I feel really grateful, and I'm really grateful for all of you. So thank you.